He was born in the cold silence of Viipuri, Finland in 1919, a land where winter never truly ended and neither did war. The boy's name was Lauri Törni. His world was carved out of snow, fear, and discipline. He wasn't raised for greatness, he was raised for survival. In a nation caught between giants, every child learned that the snow could hide either life or death. And Lauri, he chose to become the snow. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939, the world barely noticed. To most, it was just another border dispute. But to Lauri and the men of Finland, it was existence itself. The Winter War had begun. Soviet tanks rolled through frozen forests, crushing everything in their path. Finland's army was outnumbered, outgunned, and forgotten by its allies. But Lauri Törni refused to retreat. He joined the ranks of the Finnish army and entered a war he could not win, but would never surrender. The snowstorm became his ally. Soviet soldiers called it a nightmare. Invisible Finnish ski troops appearing from the blizzard, striking and vanishing into the white. Among them, Lauri stood out for his fearlessness. He led from the front, silent, precise, ruthless. To him, every shot fired was not for glory, but for survival. The Soviets nicknamed Finnish soldiers the White Death. For Lauri, it wasn't a nickname, it was a destiny. As the months dragged on, Finland's small army fought like ghosts. They burned tanks with Molotov cocktails, cut off Soviet columns, and disappeared into the trees. Against impossible odds, they stalled Stalin's Red Army. But courage alone could not stop the tide. After 100 days of frozen horror, Finland was forced to sign a peace treaty. They lost land, but not their pride. Lauri came out of the war as a young lieutenant, hardened by ice and blood, and carrying a hatred that burned deeper than the snow could bury. Peace was only a pause. When the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Finland saw a chance for revenge. They called it the Continuation War. For Lauri Törni, it was personal. He didn't fight for Hitler or for ideology, he fought for Finland's revenge. And when the call came, he didn't hesitate. He joined the Germans' elite units for training, crossing into a new uniform, a new language, and a new war. In the forests of Karelia, Lauri led long-range reconnaissance patrols behind Soviet lines. His men worshipped him, not out of fear, but out of respect. They said he could move through the woods without sound, that he could smell danger before it arrived. His leadership was brutal, honest, and unwavering. To his soldiers, he wasn't a man, he was a force of nature. To the Soviets, he became a legend whispered in the dark. But legends don't last forever. As the war turned against Germany, Finland found itself trapped between two enemies, its former ally and its eternal foe. When the Soviets came again in 1944, Finland signed another uneasy peace. The Germans were now the enemy. Lauri Törni, who had fought shoulder to shoulder with them, refused to accept it. For him, switching sides was betrayal. But in war, politics decide survival. He couldn't live with it, so he vanished into the forests once more. He was captured, escaped, captured again. Each time he slipped through the cracks like smoke. Finland, broken and weary, tried to rebuild. But Lauri was now an outlaw, too dangerous to keep, too proud to forgive. They imprisoned him for treason, though many soldiers still whispered his name with respect. The man who had once defended Finland's borders now sat behind its bars, silent, unrepentant. Years passed. The world moved on, but Lauri Törni did not. Then one night he escaped again, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost of the war that refused to end. No one knew where he went, until whispers began to surface. Somewhere across the Atlantic, in the land of second chances, a familiar man with unfamiliar papers had appeared. His name was no longer Lauri Törni. It was Larry Thorne. America didn't know his past. All they saw was a quiet, disciplined immigrant with eyes that had seen too much. He found work on cargo ships, traveling from port to port, chasing nothing but distance from his own history. Yet inside, the soldier in him was never gone. He had fought under 2 flags, survived 2 wars, and buried too many friends to count. But destiny, it seemed, wasn't done with him. When war broke out again, this time in Korea and later in the jungles of Vietnam, Larry Thorne felt the old fire return. He enlisted in the U.S. Army, beginning from the bottom, proving himself once more. His instructors noticed something strange: the calm precision, the unbreakable discipline.
He had worn too many uniforms to count, but the one he put on in America
wasn't just a soldier.
It wasn't about borders anymore. It was about belonging. The stars and stripes on his shoulder weren't just colors. They were a promise of a new life, a place where a man could bury his past beneath the weight of duty. Larry Thorne was reborn in the United States Army. He was 30, but he trained like a man half his age. Every obstacle course, every firing range, every test, he treated it like a battlefield. Failure was death. The officers noticed him immediately. There was something about the way he moved, precise, disciplined, silent. When others hesitated, he stepped forward. When recruits complained, he smiled. He didn't talk much about where he came from, but the stories were written on his scars. In the 1950s, when the Army was reshaping itself into a global force, men like Larry stood out. They called him the toughest man in the unit. No one questioned it. He was soon assigned to the newly formed U.S. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets. It was the perfect home for a man like him. The Green Berets were made for unconventional warfare, small teams, deep missions, behind enemy lines. The kind of fight Lauri Törni had been born for. Under that green cap, he became something more than a soldier. He became a legend among men who were already legends. His training missions in the late 1950s and early 1960s were brutal. He specialized in guerrilla tactics, survival, and sabotage. He taught younger soldiers how to move silently, how to strike without being seen, how to make the forest your ally. He never spoke of his past in Finland or Germany, but his methods carried the ghost of those wars. When asked how he knew so much, he'd just grin and say, "Experience." Behind that grin, there was still a man haunted by what he'd lost. He'd fought under 3 flags, but he'd never had a home. America was his last chance, not just to fight, but to belong. He poured his soul into his men. They trusted him completely. To them, Captain Thorne was unbreakable. To himself, he was just trying to outrun history. In 1963, he was deployed on special operations missions in Laos and later in South Vietnam. These weren't normal battles, they were shadows of war, hidden from newspapers and headlines. Larry led reconnaissance teams deep into enemy territory. His men said he was fearless. The danger didn't seem to touch him. Whether it was climbing cliffs in the dark or landing in hostile jungles, he never flinched. One soldier said, "He looked death in the eyes like it was an old friend." When the war in Vietnam escalated, Thorne volunteered again and again. Each mission took him farther from safety and deeper into chaos. The jungle was nothing like the frozen forests of Finland, yet he moved through it the same way. Quiet, calculating, unstoppable. He had traded snow for humidity, but the instinct was still there. To him, a battlefield was a battlefield. The terrain didn't matter, the mission did. He was respected by American officers and admired by his Vietnamese allies. They called him a ghost, the man who appeared out of nowhere, finished the fight, and vanished before dawn. His legend spread through the special forces like wildfire. But for all his calm on the outside, inside, he carried the same storm he'd always had. At night, when the camps fell silent, He would sit apart from the others, cleaning his weapon, eyes lost in memories that no one could imagine. He'd seen empires rise and fall, watched friends die under flags that no longer existed. He had survived battles that history books would never mention. Yet here he was again, halfway across the world, fighting another war that wasn't his, and somehow it felt right. He wrote letters home to friends in Finland, careful not to reveal too much. He told them he had found purpose again. They wrote back saying they still remembered him, the Finnish hero who vanished. They couldn't believe he was now an American captain. But that was Larry Thorne, always the soldier, never the spectator. Then came October 18, 1965, a routine search and rescue mission deep in the Laotian jungle. His helicopter lifted off under heavy clouds, carrying Larry and his small team into enemy-held mountains. They were looking for a downed plane. Nothing unusual, just another mission. He had done hundreds like it, but this one would be his last. Minutes after takeoff, the weather turned violent. The jungle below vanished beneath a wall of fog. Radio contact broke. The helicopter never returned. Search teams scoured the area for days, then weeks. Nothing. No wreckage, no bodies. It was as if the jungle had swallowed them whole. Official reports listed him as missing in action. His brothers in arms refused to believe he was gone. If anyone could survive that, one of them said, it's Larry. But even legends have to rest sometime. For years, rumors drifted through the Special Forces community. Some said he'd been captured. Others said he was still out there, living with the Montagnards in the jungle, waiting for a war that would never end. His name became a ghost story told by soldiers before missions, the man who served 3 armies and never came home.
For years after that day, the jungle kept its secrets. Men came and went, wars ended, presidents changed, and generations moved on. But the name Larry Thorne still echoed quietly in the ranks of the Green Berets. Some said he'd become part of the land itself, another ghost lost to the endless green. Others believed he had survived, blending into the shadows he knew so well. But the truth was buried far deeper, beneath layers of time, foliage, and silence. The Vietnam War dragged on, and the world watched it tear a generation apart. To most, it was another brutal conflict. But to the few who remembered Larry, it was personal. They spoke of him not as a legend, but as a man who had given everything he had to every cause he ever believed in. He was gone, yet somehow his presence remained, stitched into the fabric of the Green Beret Brotherhood. In Finland, his story became a whisper. Officially, Lauri Törni was long dead. The government that once imprisoned him now spoke of him with quiet respect. His old comrades remembered him not as a traitor, but as a man who simply refused to stop fighting. In every war, there are men who carry the weight of all wars, men who cannot rest until the battle is done. Lauri was one of them. The years turned into decades. The jungle grew thicker. The crash site that had taken him lay hidden under layers of mud, trees, and vines. His name faded from headlines, replaced by new wars, new heroes, new tragedies. But history has a strange way of circling back to those it forgets. It was 1999 when a joint American-Vietnamese search team finally stumbled upon a wreck deep in the Laotian mountains. Rusted metal, twisted blades, remnants of a helicopter. The discovery didn't mean much at first, until they found the dog tags. The letters had faded with time, but they were still there. Larry A. Thorne. After 34 years, the jungle had given him back. The remains were flown to the United States, where forensic teams worked tirelessly to confirm the identity. The bones were old, scattered, but the evidence was clear. It was him. The man who fought under 3 flags, who defied 3 armies, who had finally come home.
The Pentagon confirmed it in 2003. Captain Larry Thorne, formerly Lauri Törni of Finland, had been found. The news spread quietly but deeply. Among the Green Berets, it was as if a ghost had finally found peace. Men who had served decades after him felt a strange sense of closure. His name resurfaced in military history books, documentaries, and memorial walls. Finland honored him posthumously, acknowledging his extraordinary, if complicated, journey. The same government that once called him a criminal now called him a national hero. When his coffin arrived at Arlington National Cemetery, the skies were clear, as if even the weather paused to acknowledge the moment. The American flag draped over the casket was bright and crisp, unwrinkled by time. Around it stood soldiers from 3 generations, their uniforms reflecting every era he had lived through. Some wore the Green Beret, others the modern combat patch. All stood in silence. As the bugle played, the sound carried far across the white rows of stone. A soldier who had once fought the Soviets in the snow, the Germans in the forest, and the Viet Cong in the jungle, now lay among heroes of every war America had ever fought. His journey was over. The chaplain spoke softly. A man may serve many flags, but honor belongs to one place, the heart. For the men who attended, it wasn't just a burial. It was a closing chapter of a story that had stretched across continents and decades. Lauri Törni, Larry Thorne, soldier, wanderer, ghost, finally had a home. Even in death, his story refused to fade. Military historians began digging into his past, uncovering the incredible truth. How a Finnish boy from Viipuri had gone from fighting Stalin's armies to joining Hitler's commandos and then becoming one of America's most respected special forces officers. It was almost impossible to believe, yet every piece fit perfectly. To some he was a hero, to others a contradiction. But to those who understood war, truly understood it, he was the embodiment of a soldier's soul. Loyal to no nation, but forever loyal to the fight. They said he had fought against tyranny in all its forms, no matter which flag it wore. And maybe that's what made him different. He wasn't driven by politics or glory, he was driven by purpose. Even in Arlington, his story doesn't rest quietly. Soldiers who pass his grave stop for a moment, read the name, and wonder, how can one man fight for so many sides and still die with honor? The answer lies not in allegiance, but in identity. Larry Thorne didn't belong to any one army. He belonged to the brotherhood of men who cannot walk away from battle, those who live and die by a code older than nations. For years, documentaries would tell his story. Writers would call him the ultimate soldier, the man who fought for 3 flags. But none could truly capture what he represented, the restless spirit of a warrior who couldn't stop fighting, because peace never found him.
They say some men are born soldiers, but for Lauri Törni, for Larry Thorne, it was more than destiny. It was a calling that refused to let him rest. Even now, decades after his death, his story burns quietly in the hearts of those who hear it. A story not of sides or nations, but of a man who lived by one unbreakable rule: never surrender. In the end, it didn't matter that he fought for Finland, then Germany, then America. What mattered was that he stood where most men would fall. He carried a rifle not for ideology, but for survival, for brotherhood, for something deeper, something only those who have looked death in the eyes can understand. In Finland, his old comrades would sometimes sit together in silence, raising a glass in his memory. Lauri never stopped fighting, one of them said, his eyes lost in thought. He just ran out of wars. In the United States, soldiers in the Green Beret community still tell his tale to new recruits. There was once a man, they say, who crossed continents to fight for what he believed in. He wore 3 uniforms, spoke 3 languages, but had one heart, the heart of a warrior. His photograph still hangs in training halls, his name etched into history as a symbol of relentless courage.
Somewhere deep in the jungles of Laos, where his helicopter fell, nature has reclaimed everything. Vines curl over rusted steel. Rainwater fills the cracks in the earth, and the sound of the jungle drowns all memory. But the soil remembers. The land holds stories no book can tell. And if you listen closely, some say you can still hear the faint echo of rotor blades cutting through the mist. The ghost of Captain Larry Thorne, forever flying. War for him was never about hate. It was about purpose, about protecting the man next to you, about doing the impossible again and again. He was a soldier who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. A man who fought under 3 flags but carried only one truth inside him, that courage doesn't wear a uniform. The irony of his life is haunting. A man who survived the Soviets, outlived the Nazis, and fought through the Cold War, only to die in a mission far from home. Yet maybe that's exactly how he wanted it. Not in a quiet room, not in the shadow of medals or memories, but out there, where life and death dance together under the same sky. In the halls of history, his story sits in the gray, neither villain nor saint, neither patriot nor mercenary, just a soldier, pure, raw, and unyielding. In every age, there are men like him, restless spirits forged in the chaos of battle, searching for meaning in a world that doesn't understand them. They fight not because they want to, but because they can't do anything else. And maybe that's what makes Larry Thorne unforgettable. He showed that loyalty isn't about borders, it's about the code you live by. He gave his life to a mission, to his men, to the fight. And in doing so, he became something more than a soldier. He became a legend. Today, as visitors walk through Arlington and pass his grave, Section 60, Grave 8136, most don't know his story. They see a name, a rank, a date. But if they stop for a moment, if they dig deeper, they'll find one of the wildest, most impossible stories the 20th century ever produced. A man who fought against the Soviets, joined the Germans, and died serving the United States, all in the span of one lifetime. It sounds like fiction, but it's not. It's the truth. The truth of a man who refused to let history decide his fate. As the world moves on, as wars fade into textbooks and films, one thing remains certain: Larry Thorne's legacy will never fade. Because legends aren't built on medals or memorials. They're built on stories like his. Stories of men who never gave up, no matter the odds, no matter the flag. And maybe that's how it should end. Not with silence, but with the echo of his last flight, vanishing into the mist, free at last. The soldier who fought for 3 countries. The man who belonged to war. The ghost who found peace only when the fight was finally over.